Athena Lab is very pleased to welcome Admiral Angus Topshee, Commander of the Royal Canadian Navy, to discuss security issues, Arctic and Antarctic connections, and opportunities for cooperation with the Chilean Navy. Welcome, Admiral. Thanks for coming to Athena Lab. I'd like to begin with your recent visit to the Chilean Antarctica.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain the reason for you to visit the Chilean Antarctica and why you decided to send a Royal Canadian Navy ship to sail so far south?
Yeah, so my visit was to visit that ship and to visit the scientists who were embarked, just so I could understand what the work they were doing. And the purpose of the deployment of the ship was because we know that there's a lot of activity in our northern region in the Arctic north of Canada, and we wanted to compare that activity with what we see happening in the South Pole, because we're concerned about security around the world.
In your point of view, what experience can be shared regarding the two poles, and what connections do you see between the Arctic and the Antarctica?
Well, they are quite different, the Arctic being an ocean, Antarctica a continent, but there are a lot of other similarities in terms of they're very harsh environments. I listened to one of the Chileans we talked to at your base talk about the fact that Antarctica doesn't want humans there and it works aggressively to get rid of them. The Arctic is no different. It's very difficult to survive in our north, and I think that there's a lot to be learned from each other about how we can manage in those environments and how, in fact, we can thrive in some respects to do the work that we need to do.
The Chilean and Canadian navies made an exercise like RIMPAC and have cooperated in the past at the sea in training. Mm-hmm. In your opinion, what are the new areas of cooperation where our navies can work in the future or soon?
Well, we share a lot in common. Chile and Canada both have very long coastlines and large ocean areas that we're responsible to protect for our countries and for our citizens. The Chilean Navy is one of the most professional navies I've worked with. I had the great privilege of having a Chilean deputy when I was the Maritime Component Commander for RIMPAC in 2020. We also share in common the Combat Management System 330, so Chile has adopted our system, and the Chilean Navy has proven to be excellent at maintaining older ships, something that we have a lot to learn from as well, because what you've done with the Type 23 frigates that you brought from the UK has been very impressive.
The Royal Canadian Navy is a globally deployed navy. For example, in the Indo-Pacific region, and of course in the Arctic and in the Atlantic. What is the most challenging scenario for you today, or for your Navy today?
The most challenging scenario for us, it goes back to the basics of navies, is to understand everything that's happening on, above, and under the waters around Canada, because in all three of our oceans there are threats and challenges. So to be able to see what's happening, talk about what's happening, the ability to communicate about it, and then a response capability in all three of our oceans is a challenge because of the size. We have the longest coastline in the world. So we're really proud of the fact that our Navy is undergoing the largest recapitalization in our history since the Second World War. We've got 6 Arctic icebreakers now, one of which we sent down to the South Pole. We're building 15 new destroyers, 2 new tankers. So we're building a fleet that will be able to defend Canadian waters.
Canada has given strong support to Ukraine since the beginning of the Russian invasion. From the Canadian Navy point of view, how could Ukraine be supported in a possible ceasefire or truce phase? I'm thinking in the Black Sea, of course. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we are exploring options for how we could contribute to the Black Sea. What we already know from the operations we're doing with other NATO partners like Romania is there are a lot of mines that have been put into the Black Sea in the course of this conflict, and so we think we would have a role to play potentially in helping remove unexploded ordnance, mines, and all of the other sort of leftovers of war, and to help Ukraine with that. I don't see us sending a ship into the Black Sea. It would really depend on what the nature of the ceasefire was and is there a need for a Canadian ship there. And then there's the Montreux Convention, which restricts access into the region too. So it would be complicated, not something that's impossible, but it would have to be for the right reasons.
I read you have a great career.
Mm-hmm.
You've been deployed along many places in different and difficult places across the world. Mm-hmm. Do you see the maritime environment is changing in terms of geopolitics? Is becoming more dangerous these last years?
I think that we have seen the greatest era of prosperity in human history since the Second World War, largely because the seas have been available for everybody. The shipping container was invented. That really made it easy to trade by sea. And then the fact that there weren't any major wars, that choke points weren't preventing people getting through for the most part. It meant that globally prosperity increased. We've seen the greatest rise in human well-being. Now there are still absolutely areas of poverty and problems, but when the seas are free and open and available to all in a sustainable manner, we all benefit. And so the Royal Canadian Navy is absolutely dedicated to trying to work with partners like Chile to continue to enforce the use of the oceans for everybody.
Well, in some way you mentioned the issue of aging ships.
Yes.
Just to finish.
Yeah.
Like many navies these days, the issue of replacing aging combat ships and submarines is a major dilemma. How is the Royal Canadian Navy addressing this problem, both at level of shipbuilding and in terms of narratives? I mean, in terms to the importance of the Navy for a country that shares huge coastlines and free oceans.
Yeah, what we've learned is that it always is best to have systems in common with other navies. So the fact that CMS 330 is used by Chile and other navies means that there are more people to make sure that it's the best system that it can be. So we're very proud of the fact our new River-class destroyers are built upon the British Type 26 global combat ship that they're building, that Australia is also building. We've built a shipbuilding industry in Canada to build those ships. They built our icebreakers, they're building our tankers. So we're very proud of a sovereign shipbuilding capability for Canada because we think that's what's necessary in this world today. But we don't take that everywhere. For our submarines, we're going to be buying up to 12 conventionally powered submarines. Our plan is to buy those from a yard that will make them overseas and to make sure that all of the maintenance is done in Canada so that the sovereign capability of those submarines, our ability to keep operating them, that will be back in Canada. And so that's how we're sort of finding the right balance between cost and schedule and the capability that we need and self-sufficiency as well.
But in terms of narratives, in terms of how you justify your Navy to the Canadian citizens.
So the way I've been doing it is with the narrative about the importance of peace and prosperity benefits to all of the security on the oceans. But recently Canadians have become very conscious of the fact that the three oceans that for much of our history have protected us no longer protect us unless there's a Navy on them that can make sure that no one comes into our waters without our permission. No one does anything in our waters that would be negative to our interests. And so there's a lot of support in Canada right now for building a Navy that will absolutely control our waters and make sure that everything that happens on them is to the benefit of Canada.
But I can assume that the situation is becoming more difficult in the Arctic, especially because it's becoming more competitive.
Absolutely, and that's why. So we had an icebreaker in the Royal Canadian Navy back in the 1950s, but there wasn't any reason for us to sustain that icebreaker, so we stopped, and we transferred it to our Coast Guard, and our Coast Guard has maintained some icebreaking capability in the high north. But in the early 2000s, the government decided that we needed to have a Navy capability up in the north as well. So the government of Canada has invested a lot in northern security. NORAD modernization, so North American Aerospace Defense Command. There's 38 million Canadian dollars going towards modernizing and upgrading all of those systems to defend Canada in the air and from space. We're also investing in Navy capabilities like the 6 icebreakers, like our new submarines, like a lot of new surveillance systems, new communication systems. So to make sure we have complete domain awareness in the north and a response capability.
Going back to the issue of ships, also, well, you build your own ships, but there are Canadian companies that design good ships.
Yes.
As the build,
yes.
Our icebreaker.
We're very proud of the fact that our design has been popular and has been built down here, so it's great to see.
Well, thanks, Admiral.
Yeah, thank you very much.
To have you here.
Absolutely.